This is Season 3, Episode 1. That's right, Season 3, we're back. Of Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast all about upping your game. Doesn't matter if you're a game master or player, you'll find advice, ideas, and some strong opinions. Our episode tonight is introducing new players to the hobby or group. Or you can check out anytime, but you can never leave. Welcome to Mastering the RPG, a tabletop RPG podcast. Like I said, it's all about maximizing your game with ideas, advice, cool stuff found, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I'm Carl with my co-hosts Eric and James, and you can find all our information about the show at masteringtherepg.com. You can send us an email, give us some feedback, questions at gamemaster@masteringtherepg.com. So I'm very excited to be back on the mics with you folks. Good day, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're at.
James
good
is
morning,
in the
Carl.
Feywild. That's established canon.
That's
James
right.
lives in the Feywild.
Good morning in this beautiful spring morning down here in Australia. So it's lovely. Good to be back. It's been a while. It's been a few weeks.
Certainly has.
And many games under the belt since then. So keen to have a chat and talk through some of the things that we've been doing, and again provide some more advice to budding games masters and players out there. It's going to be good.
Yeah, we just finished the science fiction campaign that we talked about many times in the previous episodes. They found the master program, rebooted it, or whatever you want to call it. Everything shut down, and they actually ended up getting stuck on a paradise planet because none of their equipment worked anymore because it was all
We shut the Matrix down, and then we were in a crappy. We were stuck in a crappy basement somewhere, basically.
So now we're going to start a new one. So we're working through we just did the session 0 using many of the lessons that we espoused here.
Yes.
So that was exciting. So yeah, Eric, how about you? What you been up to?
Well,
other than that campaign,
for sure. Some other campaigns. I'm trying to learn some new systems. Maybe something that we'll do here. Maybe, we don't know. We're throwing around some ideas. Some stuff of my own. Just a lot of different mix. But yeah, different games. Ran a one-shot for some friends. Just kind of random stuff.
Very
I'm
cool.
at the end of my year's games at the moment, so putting together the finales, kind of writing the last, kind of 5-10 sessions for most of my groups. So that's very, very exciting. And I've been invited to try a new system called Die, and I know nothing about it. So I've got a couple of one shots coming up of this game called Die. So I'll let you know how it goes.
It seems like it's a deadly game, maybe, or something.
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Literally know nothing about it at all, but it's based on a comic book is the one thing. Okay, so I do know one thing.
Oh, that's cool.
It's based on a comic book called Die.
Maybe
So
it only
we'll
uses
see what
1d6. That's why it's called Die.
happens. Yeah, maybe.
Okay, now 100 people subscribers. We got to stop doing that.
All right, well, that's cool. Yeah, I'm sure you'll get a chance to tell us more about it when you get a chance. So that's awesome. So kind of getting into it, I'm actually pretty excited that we got a couple of emails during our little break.
Email.
One of them was actually from the Free Pie. I hope I am pronouncing that right. The Free Pie offered us ideas on Season 3. I won't read the entire email, but a lot of those were good ideas, and we actually incorporated a few of them into our progression. We brainstormed, got together, would have had a retreat, but we're all located in different parts of the country, but we brainstormed, we sang Kumbaya, and we came up with some episodes that we'd like to do, and I'd like to thank the Free Pie for giving us some of those ideas. We had a second email from Rob, and he was asking, I was looking over Kickstarter today, and I found the new Harn World hardbacks. It looks like an amazing world to play in with such detail. This made me start to think, where do you start? With so much detail, how can you begin with not knowing it all? Does this reduce your ability to be creative on your own by filling in all the hidden dark places with known information? So pretty good questions, I think. I don't know, James, did you want to start off with some of your ideas, or do you want me to layer in first?
Yeah, sure. And Han, my God, I haven't heard of Han for many years. Han is a true to life medieval system, so it's based very much on European medieval, but with a fantasy kind of twist. For me, and this goes for or whenever I look at any published campaign world. So this is different to a published campaign module where you have a story, but where you open up effectively an atlas and an encyclopedia and pull your hair out and go, where the hell do I start? I definitely use the idea of a spiral campaign where you look at a small part of the world, potentially the first village, and really look at that village alone. So, and then slowly expand out. So from the village to the next town, and then from the town to the next city, and then from that city to the next city, and so on and so forth. And there's a couple of things here too. Generally, it's okay if you're using a published world to go a little bit more gentle on yourself. There's benefits of using a published world in that all the details are written. You just have to find them in the book. So you can go a little slower when you're looking up some of this information. But one of the benefits I find is you don't need to take as many notes, because when you're ad-libbing some of this stuff, when you do a homebrew, you always have to remember what you've already kind of laid on the table and make sure you make a note of some of the things that you're ad-libbing. With a published world, you're really finding out those details. But don't be afraid to restrict where the players can go and what they can interact with. When I ran my Fey Touched game with Eric, for example, I restricted the whole of Midgard, which is Kobold Press's world, into a forest within a duchy. So I basically told the players, we're all going to be from the Grand Duchy of Dornig. You guys need to figure out where within that duchy you are, and then really restrict the access of kind of some of the information, just to make it a little easier on you when you're starting a campaign. And then over time, you expand out a little bit more and a little bit more. So in my mind, most of the pre-published Atlas-like worlds still leave a lot of gaps. You still leave heaps of room in order to bring your own flavour to it. So I don't feel like that's a missed opportunity. But in my opinion and my advice, start very small, restrict what the players know to begin with, and that way it takes less study time to become more familiar with it.
And I think you hit on a big point that I would bring up is find a little place in the world that isn't as fleshed out, a little nugget that you can bring some of the lore in. And you really you don't need to know everything, just like you said, James. It's really just some of the basic stuff that's really important that everybody would know, like the gods, for example. You'd really want to understand those and what they mean as far as the PCs get created. But find a little corner, and you can bring your own lore, a little bit your own into it before you have to spend all the time learning every detail and then saying, I guess my problem with published settings sometimes, and I've done mostly Dragonlance, is what is there left to do? Sometimes they put way too much history and way too much things, and so sometimes you just got to find a corner where people haven't touched yet and work through it from there.
Yeah, you guys totally... a lot of the points I thought of, or I also think of, are really good points. And I think for me, which I've personally experienced this more than once, either as a player and as a game master, I think the first thing that's really important is just to set expectations with players. Because there's a lot of times where the game master will know less of the lore than players will. And so players will be... So you have to tell them, like, I'm doing my own thing. So it's important to be like, this is my version of X world, right? That gives you some more freedom, and that will then tell the players that, like, not everything that you know is correct. Like the big things, yes, but like, don't just assume everything, because this is my version of the world, right? If we're talking about like Galarian for Pathfinder, this is my Galarian. I think that's really important, is to set those expectations with the players. And just like you said, Carl, but I would even go further. Like if we do my Fallout game, where I wanted to play in the world of Fallout, and basically what you were saying, Carl, but I think even more so is like, you can just either, completely create a region or create like something that wasn't there at all. and just be like, this is my setting within the setting kind of thing. Or like if the example of Galarian, you'd be like, there's this island here in my version, right? And this island nation, and that's where we're playing the game. And this island nation is of my creation, so you can kind of play off what James is saying. But having just like your own thing completely within that gives you the flexibility of both, like Carl was saying, like the cosmology and the overall lore of the world. And kind of like if people had traveled there, like they could be like, oh, I'm from, Andoran, which is like a Galarian thing. I'm from this place, but I've traveled to this newly discovered kingdom or something. So some of that background stuff is done, but you can really have fun with a little bit of your own, like quote unquote homebrew, but then still have all the big stuff. So those are my two things.
Very cool. Very cool. Hopefully that helps answer that question, and appreciate all the comments and questions that come in. And that was a great question. So thank you, Rob, for that. Appreciate it. So I think we can head off and hit the main topic.
Mastering the RPG with Carl, Eric, and James. Yeah.
So our main topic today is introducing new players to the hobby and or your game group. And so there's really two kind of things that we want to explore a little bit, which is players who are brand new to the hobby, haven't played before, kind of learning the ropes, and then bringing players into an existing game group. Now, these could be experienced players, or it could be that newly formed player who's just new to the hobby. So we'll like to kind of cover both of those. And I think maybe we'll start with the challenges of bringing somebody new into the hobby. So I'll tee this up a little bit. I'll walk through. So let's start with some of the challenges. Maybe we'll start, Eric, maybe you want to add a little something, being a player and yourself.
Being a new player yourself, Eric. What are the
brand new to the hobby.
Yes. I mean, we were all new players once, right? It's like everything. I think especially nowadays, I think a lot of people might have preconceived notions or assumptions or judgments, right? You don't know what anybody's going to bring with them kind of on that. But generally, if somebody it's important to know who the player is. If this is somebody that's like, they've come to you or they're just generally excited. There's other times I've had friends where I tell them about it and I'm like, I think you would like it, but they're more hesitant because of whatever, if they have self-esteem issues or they just don't think they're going to like it. Right. So you don't really ever know what you're getting into. So it's kind of important. That's one thing that can be confusing. If you think one thing and it's another thing too. On those judgments, I think people think, if they see something like Critical Role, they might think well, I have to be the most brilliant voice actor or something. I have to be the most practiced improviser and have a insane background to do voices and all that. And then that's something, again, you have to deal with. I'll let you guys, I'll tag it off so we can keep it.
And the answer is yes. You need to be an expert in all these things in order to play. No,
immediately, yeah.
Just
a couple of the other challenges for me is that these games have got a hell of a lot of rules. There's rule books that go, a whole library of rule books that I'm literally watching behind Carl, and you can't see his camera, but there are thousands of rule books and thousands of rules, and this can be very, very daunting. A lot of the rules can be very, very complex. And of course, when you create a character, the big thing for me is the choices can often be overwhelming, particularly when you start. If I just even think of the most basic 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons character, there are 3 rule books that you could get caught up in and be stuck with in terms of a choice. So it can often be very, very difficult to kind of work your way through that and interpret those rules for a new player straight away. Carl?
Yeah, I think those are really the key things to take away from me is rules. There's just a lot of them. I mean, everybody, when they talk about role-playing games, they say, hey, you can be anything you want. It's, fun to pretend. You can be all sorts of stuff. But then when you come and you start looking at, a several 100-page book that explains how you can be somebody and then having to pick that up, I mean, it's completely foreign. It's not something people are used to. It's just a different concept. I mean, when video games don't have rule books anymore. I mean, video games have a playthrough, and video games, you don't have to sit down with a big text. So rules are, game rules are a foreign concept to most people coming into the hobby. Like James, you said, there's just so many choices. It's better to kind of limit them. So definitely, it's tough to. I don't know. When I brought my kids into the game, they kind of just sort of fell into it. So I never really had to go through that process of teaching them. They just sort of osmosisized, that's a word,
Yeah.
and brought it in. And so anybody's just kind of coming in cold turkey. There's a lot of things that just will not make sense. And like Eric, you said, do I need to do voices? I mean, I'm pretending to be a person. What does that mean to pretend to be something or act? What does in character even mean? Right, as opposed to out of character, right? So,
and it's also one of those things like that's. I almost pictured it as almost like sailing, where you have like the practical knowledge and the learned knowledge, and because a lot of our games are not just about the rules. I mean, there's the rules there, and then you're connecting that with like the other stuff that we talk a lot about on these podcasts. A lot is like, how do you make good characters? How do you interact with your players? How do you do a good narrative? Like even as a player. Right, and connecting those things, I think, can also be very discoordinate for a new player to come in. Is like not really understanding how to do that. And I think all of us, like that, when we've been playing so long, there's just even going to like a new game, we just understand core concepts and we just understand how how to make even if character creation is wildly different. I can generally come into any game system at this point, and I read a lot of them now, and just be like, and just kind of understand the flow of actualizing my character into what the game wants me to do, even if I don't understand the rules. And I think those new players are just not going to have those kind of meta tools that we have, just because we're so practiced at it.
They don't understand the 3-letter acronyms that are thrown around. Right?
Yeah. The acronyms are big. That's a big part.
I do think, though, there are some universal things that everyone knows to play. Let's pretend is something that kids do, and people are at least used to the concept of that, of we're making up a character and we're going to pretend that we're something else. I think most people are very familiar with just acting in general, and so taking on a role is not entirely alien. So playing to that kind of, we're playing let's pretend, but we're going to codify the things that you're pretending about is probably not a bad way to kind of approach it to begin with.
Makes a lot of sense. So those are the challenges, and there's a lot of them, right? But they're not insurmountable, obviously, because there's a lot of people who come to the hobby and enjoy it and have learned it. So let's talk about some, what are some ideas and sort of the structure around them that we can bring to the table to help overcome some of these challenges? I'll go ahead and throw a couple out there myself. First, it's, and I think we mentioned a little bit, of set those expectations. Make sure that the person knows that there's no judgment. We're all here to have fun. Everybody's going to be willing to help out. There's no, and there's really no reason to be apprehensive, because we're all doing the exact same thing. We're all playing the game, and no one's trying to be sillier or going to complain if you're silly. That's not a problem. When we mentioned a little bit about the characters, for example, I mean, I would always start with pre-gens. Kind of start there. Don't force. Eric may disagree with me, but
I am going to.
But don't force. But don't force them to go through the entire character creation step, I think. And then when you're going through the rules, kind of try to stick with the simple concepts, the key concepts, the core concepts that get things done. Don't dump the player's guide on them right away. Actually, in our YouTube channel we have on Savage Worlds, you can explain. There's a video that explains basic of the rules in 5 minutes, and that's a 200-odd page book. But you can really get understanding them in a short period of time if you really focus on just the core set. But I'll kind of leave.
That's Carl's video. I just want to put it. That's Carl's video. My kind of version of it is like 45 minutes or something.
No, you did it in 20. You still did it in like 25 minutes.
Oh, I did. For one of them.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. Well, we did the actual play one. Yes, I knew that the pre-gens was going to be a thing that we all, I thought definitely Carl was going to be on that side. I wasn't sure about James. And I'm of a different mind, not completely. I definitely agree with you. You don't want to get them through the whole thing and all the advanced options. I think, first of all, here's ultimately how I look at it when I'm talking about bringing new people or a new person in, is I want to engage them into what the hobby's about. And I think part of what the hobby's about is your character and having ownership over the character. And so I think there's different levels to the quote unquote pre-gen experience. I think completely fabricating a pre-gen character is most of the time, I don't think it's the best thing to do. It depends on the person though, obviously. The person could be something that doesn't want to deal with it at all and you might not have time. But as far as the other levels, I think some of the best way is, first of all, to be like, what kind of character do you want to play? Just ask them. And they can tell you, and then you can create it on your own as a game master. I think that would be like the lightest weight touch to go. As
Well,
far
that is
as,
a
and
pre-gen.
maybe that's what you were thinking, Carl. Well, I guess, okay. Well, so I thought as a pre-gen, it's something that you just make a character and you like okay, choose one of these. That's what I think of when you say pre-gen. When you've done one shot with us and you've done pre-gens, you've just handed me a character sheet.
Well,
right?
yeah, and that's
So-
primarily for like one shots
Like a
or
one-shot,
convention
yeah.
games or something that has a specific thing. But I guess what we're talking about in that case, when you say it's you're helping.
When you say pre-gen,
yeah, you're creating,
what
or
do
when
you
I
mean?
say pre-gens for bringing somebody into a game,
Yeah.
you're asking them those questions, and then you're helping build.
Okay.
You're building a character, and you may be handing it to them, but it's their character. It's not,
Yeah.
a rogue that I built for a one shot that I'm just handing you and saying, now you're a rogue. Congratulations. So I don't think we're
okay,
disagreeing.
that's what.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to clarify. So I'm definitely that I think is the lightest touch, and yeah. And when you are talking to them about it, be like, oh, just first of all, you can just be like, well, what kind of character do you want to play? Like, first, you've set up what kind of world it is, what kind of genre. We're playing a fantasy game. What kind of character do you want to play? And if they don't really know, just be like, okay, the good hint for me here is, well, what's like a movie or a book or a TV show character that you really like that you would want to kind of emulate that style? Like if they really like, if you brought up like Lord of the Rings, like they like Aragorn or something, like you'd be like, okay, I can make a ranger. Because not everybody knows these, these things that we, as much as we do, like what a ranger necessarily is. So I think using media for somebody who's entirely new to kind of be like, for them to be like, well, what character do you like that, you want to play that? And then you can kind of go off of there. I think that's a big hint. And I've actually used that with people before of like, who just had no idea what they wanted to do. So yeah, but Carl, what you were saying, that's like the light touch of you kind of just ask them what they want to play and you build it completely. Then there's like the I would call middleweight version where you maybe throw some suggestions out. Like, do you want to do more specific, like this style or this style? And then there's the more heavier touch, which, because I just want to say, I personally, and even as a player, I found that pretty much every game I've ever been in, I would say 90% of the games I'm in, like not your game, James, but pretty much every Carl's game and so many other games I've been in and things that I've game mastered or helped. And even outside of that, I've taught so many people at this point how to play different games. It has to be over 100 people that I've like taught the rules to. I've taught it in groups before. I've done it at game stores. It's just something, because I love teaching people stuff and I love making characters. So it's something that I found the role in very much as well. But so if you have the time, the kind of more heavier version is, not telling them every rule, but being like, okay, what's your character, like sitting down with them and constructing it together and saying suggestions of like, okay, you want to be a warrior. Like, well, there's these options. Like, if it's Pathfinder, like you can kind of go with a big two-handed build. You could go with a dual weapon build. You can go with a, reach build that kind of controls things. Like, you can get into some more specifics, but you still use your mastery of the system to kind of make it easier for them to parse. So I think those are the three versions, and it really depends on, of course, your time, but also how much the player is wanting to be engaged and how much they want to be like engaged in that process. But I never think, and like Carl, like we actually not disagreeing with this, I never, ever think you should just hand them a complete pre-gen, because you really want them to have that feeling of some ownership and, and that will engage them more into the game. So sorry, that was my rant about that.
I think I'm in a foot in both camps here, and it is all about, and you touched on it perfectly, Eric, it's about time. I have a lot of players that join a game where I get about an hour heads up that I've got a new player coming in. And in that instance, I always use pre-gens because there's no time. So I present my fan out of 10 or so different characters and just quickly describe which one. They can grab that character and play with it. And I'm very, very careful to stress that after 2 sessions, if you don't like that character, we'll make you a new one. But if you do like it, we can keep playing with that one. So just to give them
that's a
the
good
option
idea.
of which way you go, and because it's easy enough to kind of have a character leave the group, so bye fellow adventurers, and walk out, and then a new guy meets them at the next tavern. The one thing I found, and I on board, it's a business thing, but I on board kind of a good dozen new players every single year with my kids' games as kids come and go from my games. One thing I've found is a little cheat sheet about character options that I present to my kids, and so I'll take Dungeons and Dragons as the example. I have one line of what each of the classes do. I have one line on the bulk of the lineages that we're going to be using, or the races, and one line on all the backgrounds. And I say, pick which one of these three you like. So it gives them some choice. Yep, I like this, this, and this. And then what I ask them to do is come up with 3 adjectives that describe your character. And I actually print out a list of adjective words. It'll be quick and witty and, and strong. And from those building blocks, if I've got the 3 basic structures and 3 descriptive things, I can then work with them to kind of flesh out a character based on those things. So you can kind of, once you've got some very basic concepts of a character, then you can move forward. And I find that that's the easiest way to quickly get to the crux of what characters these guys would like to play. And then I do all the heavy lifting. So in the first instance, I will guide players to, here are some really great options in order to do that. Here are some really great powers that I think would work for that, and kind of edit out the choice in a lot of ways for a brand new player so that you can kind of come through. And then the big caveat of all of that is for the first 3 sessions, I let them change anything. So, actually, I'm really not enjoying this. Can I try something new? Sure. You just kind of don't pigeonhole them into the idea that once you've made a choice, then that's the choice for the rest of your life. No, if you don't like any of this stuff, let's talk in between games, and we'll change things out and change things in. It gives people an opportunity to try something. Like they'll try a power or a spell and go, that isn't what I thought it would be. Can I pick a new one? Sure. And off you go. It's not game breaking. People won't really care. The other players certainly won't care. And so kind of having the idea that you're not locked into these choices early, because that can be really daunting. Well, if I don't get this right, and if I get this wrong, what does that mean for the rest of my game?
Excellent stuff. So we're helping them get that character ready to come into play, but then obviously they're showing up at the table. Now the fun really begins, right? To bring them, now the dauntingness of, now I'm sitting down with 5 other people, and somebody is saying, okay, what do you want to do? So now the rubber meets the road. So
I just had a couple more things as far as the sorry, I don't want to
okay, go ahead.
bring up because Carl, I also thought of you, like how I think we, like what James brought up about having the simplified options, and I think you've done that a lot, right, with your convention games. When you do Savage World sheets, you'll have like, here are just these edges, what they do, and you make it very obvious on the sheets. And
that's
right.
Those are real pre-gens. I mean, it's instead of a character. I think what you're talking about a little bit is in Savage Worlds, if you build out a character, you're picking different edges and you're building out the character. When I come to a convention, I have a character and I just take the edges that make sense for that character for what they're trying to be, and it may be 2 or 3 edges that, when the character might have had 5 or 6 if you were playing the game and you had gone through it. But it's really focused on a couple of key aspects that make the character and makes them interesting. But definitely, those definitely are pure pre-gens. This is what you get. So
but like building off on top of that, I think because you can still do that even with the kind of ways that we've talked about, like introducing players to their characters, is like having those mechanics more obvious, or like written differently on a sheet, or even doing like stuff like flashcards, where you can write down those abilities just to be easily referenced, like how James said, like a cheat sheet. And you can even and again, this a lot depends on the systems. I think it's also important to talk about what systems you use, and it again depends on the player. But like generally, I think introducing players to this hobby, it's better to go with more narrative weight systems. Like when I think about like I love Powered by the Apocalypse games, and I think a lot of those make and there's kind of a genre. They have every genre, so you can kind of fit it to whatever that kind of players want to do. But those are like really, really good to get in because they're just very much more simpler mechanics, and they don't have to learn about the grid as much, hardly at all. And things like that can be really good. It really depends on the player. Like if the person coming in is like a board gamer or plays a lot of video games, then you can start with something like 5e, right? Which is also kind of a lighter system. And that also leads me to when you're introducing new characters, you can neuter, or I guess I don't know if that's the right word, but you can like hold back certain mechanics until a couple sessions down. So if we're using the example of 5e, where 5e quote unquote feats are optional, but like most people don't play that way. But when you're doing new characters, you might say, yeah, like no feats. I mean, if it was a game that like had feats right away, like even in Pathfinder, you might hold back some of the feats just until, and then like once you've gotten 4 sessions in, be like, okay, let's go back and give you guys some feats that you were missing initially. So I think depending on the complexity of the game, it could be good to just kind of like take out portions of the core mechanics. Not too much where you break the game, but like, some of that like more complicated stuff you can take out and wait till you're kind of a couple sessions in. So sorry, that's just Carl I wanted to touch on before we actually got into sitting at the table.
And I guide players away from the more complicated character options as well. I mean, in any system, you've got your simple kind of fighter that you can whack things with a stick, right up to a more complicated kind of character like an artificer or something like that has got more complex kind of ideas. I have a tendency to, in Dungeons and Dragons, to kind of guide people away from taking clerics and druids, for example, because the spell lists are enormous and the options are endless. And so, you can kind of guide your new players away from those really complicated character types that will have them bogged down a little bit in content is what I find. The other thing also, and one last one for me, I guess, is what I tend to try and do when you're creating characters for new players is have them really focus on their motivation and their character concept rather than the rules. One of the beautiful things about new players that come into this hobby is their free-form imagination before they get constrained by the rules. I find that as players play more and learn more of the rules, and they become bound by the rules, most people, when they first play, see the opportunities as endless in terms of how they can interact with the world, and trying to encourage that, I think, is actually really wonderful. I find that, other players at the table act with wonder when a new player kind of decides they're going to do something completely out of the box. And so encouraging that by focusing on character motivation and character story rather than the rules early, you can get some real gems out of new players. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have someone arrive new with no preconceived concepts about how the game should operate.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's a great thought for sure. So with that in mind, let's jump into, so again, like I mentioned, they're at the table. You're going to start playing their first session. So what does that look like? How do you make them ease in, and how would you run that session? Who wants to jump in on that one?
Well, for me, firstly, if I can avoid it, I don't have it happen that way. Introducing a new player at the table for their first experience of role-playing, be a game with the full group already there, is something that I try and avoid. One thing that I try and do is a little prelude session or a very small one shot prior to them hitting the ground. That way you can kind of introduce some of the mechanics of the game. You can introduce some of what their character abilities can do, and you can test out some things like a bit of role play, a bit of combat, skill challenges, those kinds of things, so that they can at least understand how a game is played and understand how a game flows. So in my mind, if you're already doing a character creation session with your new player, what I try and do is allocate 30 minutes to an hour after that character creation to try and give them a taste of how the game runs. That way you've got a one-on-one situation where you can ease them into the game. They can ask any questions that they need to, in the safety of asking those questions without having the rest of the table there and feeling that horrible feeling like you're using up everyone's time. And it also allows you to provide some threads into the main story by doing this little one-on-one kind of prelude for the character. And in some ways, in my mind, that makes it easier to mesh it in with the other game, but I'll get to that shortly. So for me, it's giving them a taste of the rules before they actually sit down at the table is an important step.
So here's a question along those lines. So that's a brilliant approach to take. Would you, if that was not an option or you didn't have that opportunity, would you bring them in as an observer to start with and let them, so they don't feel like they're wasting people's time, and just let them watch the game as it proceeds? A real game, not, they may have watched Critical Role or something, but how a real game happens, and kind of demonstrate how play works, and takes an extra second or two to just explain what just happened. They just rolled for initiative. And, so this is,
and even when you bring the player, even if you've had the opportunity to do this little one-on-one session, when you first bring a player to a new table, I generally don't put any focus. I don't introduce their character until a good half an hour, 45 minutes into the session. They can then get a sense of the rhythm of the game and they can it's like you're meeting players in some way. So you're meeting what's going on, and then I'll introduce the new player once they've had a bit of an idea about what's going on already, and they can get a sense of the story before they have to commit into the play. Eric's looking at me very worried in this way. I don't think Eric's got the same opinion as I do. I tend to hold off for a little bit.
I think we started talking about bringing a new player into an already established game versus players completely new to the hobby. And I think, because the one thing I wanted to ask you, James, on that same note, what if instead of it just being one new player, what if it's all new players? And I think that's also something that people deal with a lot too, right? Is like a group of new players versus just one new player, new to the hobby.
And that's when you introduce all your homebrew rules that make D&D not D&D, because they don't know any better. Isn't that how that works?
That's an entirely different thing. How do you establish a brand new group for whole new players? I think that, to be honest, that's probably an episode in itself. For me, if you're sitting down with a table with everyone who hasn't played before, ideally what you're trying to get a sense in character creation and enthusiasm, someone will have a better idea about the game than others. Someone would have watched and read The Lord of the Rings over the others. Someone would are far more enthusiastic about the concept of playing than the others, and that's where I would go to that person and slowly bring them into the action, expand it out, and bring people in as we go. In some ways, all the really, really good published introductory adventures start with a big kind of action-oriented beginning that is very easy to understand. So one thing I would do is make sure that the first encounters, the first situations that you're involved in are very simple in terms of the concept of what the objective of that encounter needs to be. So it's very obvious that you're in the market square, someone yells, "Stop thief," and you see a guy run through the crowd with a bag in its hand. What do you do? It's very obvious about what's going on. You make it a very simple concept for the first encounter, and that way everyone has an idea of what they would do in that situation, and therefore it makes it simple for what their character would do.
I mean, even oh, go ahead, Eric. Sorry. I was just going to say, even beyond that, when I'm doing conventions and I have brand new players, and you'd be surprised how often that actually is at a convention. You'd think that'd be, a lot of people who've already played, but all the time I have parents bring in their kids who haven't really played and are just learning. And I think the play off that, it's not just a counter, even a simpler plot for the game, for the game session where there's a simple beginning. It's like you said, there's a call to action right away, stop the thief. And now you know who the thief is. And you find out that there's this, bandits are holed up and you can go get them. And now you take them out and then you discover the magical sword that you were looking for, whatever it is, but it's very simple and formulaic. That really helps people because they're trying to keep their brain on the mechanics. They're trying to keep their brain on what their character is going to do. And they're trying to keep their brain on this interweaving strange plot that you came up with, which is fine for players who know what they're doing, but sometimes it's better for just to keep it simple. So I just wanted to, it goes beyond the encounter. I just wanted to play a little off of what you said there, James.
Yeah, and that's what I was also thinking. And my thing with it too is like keeping the stakes low, like the actual stakes low, and relying more on the narrative to be like the higher stakes, like kind of the outside of their own specific experience. If this is making any sense, like don't have like it's like catching a thief. It's not like you're fighting a horde of undead all of a sudden that like is killing everybody around you. Like, so even if that could be a simple encounter, I think it's also just slow playing them in across all fields, right? Like keeping those stakes kind of low, like not just, don't make it boring. Don't make it just like, oh, we spent all day like, doing a medieval simulator of we baked
Gardening.
a stew and, chopped, like brought in the harvest or something. But you can have exciting bits without the stakes being so like, life or death, or kind of these big ideas, like you said, going to what you said, Carl, like keeping the guys simple. But you can give them hooks that are narrative hooks that are, maybe what's going on in the world. Like there's echoes in the world that are maybe will be intriguing to them. Like there's been undead attacking, just not where they are. Right. So like you're planting seeds, you're getting them excited and what the possibilities are, but you're in the immediacy, you're not overwhelming them with like their situation where, like you were talking about, Carl, of like, they're trying to keep all these other things in their head at the same time that are new to them. So you don't need to stress them out with like being in these like complicated situations or situations that are, like you said, simple, keep it simple.
Very cool. Any other thoughts that you guys have to kind
on entire groups of noobs?
Well, no, not necessarily.
That's a challenge.
That's what I thought we were kind of talking about is just new players in general, not into an established crew, but yeah.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I thought we were also talking about established players into a new group, like bringing someone in halfway through as well.
Well, that's what I wanted to jump to. If we've kind of, that's our next topic. So I just wanted to make sure we explored, because this is a big deal, right? Getting that new player in, explored it to the level that we think it deserves.
Yeah, I think like, do we bring up them ever watching anything like if they've never had an experience with an actual play, like that could be also something like here, like check out some of these actual plays, like you said, examples, right? Like I think you were saying you have them watch the session themselves, but if they're all new players, then maybe it would be good to like, hey, here's some actual plays so you can kind of see how people play it. I don't know. That was just an idea.
It's really funny because a lot of my players are kids, and you can't get them to watch an actual play because it might not be appropriate because actual plays are generally for an adult audience. And I find that their kids don't want to watch them. That their attention span is just to the point where it's like, no, I want to do it. And so for what I find is, yes, maybe. I actually prefer for new players to not necessarily get the baggage of watching an actual play. We've got a new player in our game that I'm playing with at the moment in my monthly D&D game where I'm a player, who is very well up with Critical Role and very well versed watching every season and understanding entirely. And it's his first game, and I've got to say we're undoing a bit of the harm that being an avid actual play watcher comes with, and feeling the need to be that great voice actor and have that complicated character background, and it's actually a lot less onerous to play at a game than what it's made out to be. You don't have to be as accomplished, you don't have to be as formidable. You can just kind of be mediocre at it and still have a really great time. Is kind of what we're undoing at the moment.
I think the final bit of advice to me, which I've actually seen this in use, is if you want to eventually get to a game that maybe is more complicated, like say Pathfinder 2e or something, that's the game that you want to get to. You can still start new players off in the same world with their same characters with a very simple system. I mean, there's a lot of systems now that are extremely easy. And so don't be afraid to like system transition, I guess, how I call it. Like if you go into one that is extremely narrative, that has extremely simple rules, you can start with that system in the world that you want to do it in. And then once they're more comfortable with playing in this type of world and doing improv and all the role playing, all the stuff that we talk about, then you can move it into this new system and still have the same characters, have the same world. And I've actually seen people do this before, where you do kind of a system to a different system that's more kind of complicated. So that could be something. If what I said, if your system is like the 2e or whatever, I don't know, if Call of Cthulhu is that complicated, or
Call of Cthulhu is the most basic system you've ever known.
Savage Worlds is pretty medium, but you know what I'm saying. Like start with a Fate. There's all these like single page RPGs now that are different genres. So you can start with a single page RPG, and then once they get used to that part of the game, move it into the more complicated system.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's fair. So I think that was a really good exploration of that topic. So now let's talk about this taking now a player and bringing them into an established group of players, and this could be obviously somebody we kind of explored new people. This is now an existing player who's just coming into your group. You're trying to integrate them in. Obviously, you've got a whole bunch of challenges, where the player and GM may have different expectations. The play styles might not gel. There's probably others like forcing them to, take on a role or a character that needs to be there because there's a niche not being filled or what have you. And there's probably others. So I wanted to, kind of open that up. What other challenges might there be? And then we can kind of roll into the ideas in the last bit of this episode. Any other challenges?
I guess the big challenge for me is the group dynamic, isn't it? Like you've got a group that's working very, very well. There might be a reason why you got rid of the other guy and now you need to replace, you've got a replacement. And so trying to maintain that group dynamic is very, very important because, there's nothing worse. And I've experienced this. You've introduced someone into a table and it just has not worked right from the outset. The personality conflicts are too great. And so that's the biggest concern for me is making sure that it works well together. The other challenge is trying to get it so that there is enough depth to the new character that allows them to have enough of the spotlight relatively early in the game. Because in an established campaign where people might have been playing for a year or so, the backstories are convoluted, the detail is already there, and having someone that has got enough detail in their character to compete with the complexity of the main plotline is important, to give them enough meat on the bones relatively early enough so that they've got enough to do. There's nothing worse than feeling like you're the red shirt or you're the kind of the player NPC that doesn't really have much to add to the storyline.
I think out of and you guys both hit the nail on the head, and I'm just going to expand on that a little bit. Is we've talked so much in this series about session 0, setting expectations, all those things. I think out of any other situation, this is the most important time to set expectations and be as deep and explicit as possible. And that's with what type of game it is, what like you said, James, what the party dynamic is, what kind of characters they're playing, what's been their kind of how they've been interacting with the world. I think this is by far the most important thing to do to set expectations because like you said, there could be conflicts with the new player coming in or not gelling with the group. And when you're starting a new game, like we always talk about, session 0 is to get them to generally fit the kind of campaign that you want to play and to fit that narrative. And like you said, James, when the players start taking it changes that and it adds an extra layer. And so you really, really, really have to be upfront and very this is what he's playing, this is what they're playing, and not even just what they're the class, but this is the kind of personality, right?
Yep.
You don't have to be this one specific type, like Carl said, but if all of the characters have morphed into they're generally pretty honorable. I didn't say that had to be a honorable game, but everybody kind of takes and is kind of shifted into being the heroes in that role. Really make it clear to them that you can be a little on the fence, but this is how the game has been going. This is the style it's been going. I wasn't planning on it originally, but this is how the group is. So I think that is the most important. I really can't say it enough times. I've been a new player into games. I've seen new players come into games. I've had new players come into games that I've been running, and that is always the biggest hurdle. By far, is how they gel and the narrative and the party dynamic for sure. Yeah.
Couldn't agree with you more. I've recently brought 2 new players into a group of old buddies of mine, and we've known each other for years. And it was very, very clear that I needed to stress with them that this was not a serious role-playing game. This is a beer and pretzels, a lot of goofing around, a lot of inappropriate comments at the wrong time, a very comedic interjection. So there isn't strong character. There's not huge RP. It's really rolling some dice and killing some orcs, once every 2 weeks and having a bit of fun. And the new players were really up for that. They were like, this sounds fantastic. And the pitch was not about the storyline. It was not about the setting. It was about the dynamic of the group. This is the game. Would you be interested in playing in this style of game? And thankfully, the 2 guys were really up for that and have had a come in all guns blazing on that same concept. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Setting that expectation of what the group dynamics like is really important.
So just throwing something out there. So bringing a new person in is a big deal for an existing campaign, right? You're going to invest time and effort. Have you ever thought about maybe taking and doing a one-shot kind of in that same vein, same style of game that you're playing, and just seeing how they gel with the rest of the players, see if they are hogging the spotlight, or they're a maniac, or they're murder hobo, and that just doesn't work out. Before it's like, hey, you're now integral to this plot that we're trying to create in this main campaign. Have you guys ever thought about that? Have you ever tried it?
One thing that I do is whenever I bring a new player in, I make them relevant for the current chapter that they're in. So a great example is I've just brought these 2 new guys in. The players happen to be in a specific town. They've been traveling around a lot of towns. They're in this specific town to discover a specific mystery about why has the mayor not come out of his castle and is holding himself up there. And we find out that he's actually been taken prisoner in his own castle. The 2 new players that we introduced into that game were villagers from that town that were integral into trying to work out why had the mayor not been seen. So once we had solved that mystery, and it took 2 sessions to complete that mystery, I could have said, actually, guys, this isn't working. Let's not continue. Or we could say, now we'll build in some reasons as to why you'll then continue with the group onto the next town. So it's about what's the word I'm trying to say? Compartmentalizing their interaction. So not necessarily a one-shot, because you still want to continue with the story, but have them relevant for that one encounter, that one dungeon, that one bit that you're in at the moment, and with the ability to break it off if you need to after that time. And set that expectation as well. We're going to run a couple of sessions in this adventure. If it's not working for you, that's fine. No harm, no foul. We'll walk away before we finish this little sub-module, and just set that up really easily.
So totally agree with you, James. But on that note, Carl, and I think I've never done, and I don't know how I feel about doing a separate one-shot, but I have experience, and I think this can be something that's good, is where you do a one-shot within the campaign involving that character. So to introduce them, and I think one of the things that we were going to talk about is, and I think, James, you brought this up before, is like you do that first kind of 30 minutes with them, like establishing them in the world. But if you wanted to go farther than that, what you can do is bring their character into the world and do the prequel event with them, but have the rest of the players play different characters just for that kind of event. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, you're bringing them in, you are kind of testing them out, but it's not like a separate thing. It's connected to the history of the game that you're playing, and then the other players get to it's not as precious to them when it's like this new character coming in and affecting their characters, right? And it's also can be fun for them to I've been playing a fighter for a while, but this new ranger subclass came out. Yeah, I want to try it out. So they'll be like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll play this new ranger subclass for this little kind of one shot within the campaign that we're going to do. So you're establishing this new character within the world and within the history, and it's also a shared experience, but it's not putting all the weight directly, immediately on the already established storyline and the already established characters. So it's kind of a halfway between what James is saying, what you brought up, Carl. And I've done this before, and it was pretty fun. It was definitely fun. And I think that's something that I would like to explore more. I often don't, I don't think a lot of times I brought new players in, but that's something that I probably would want to be curious to try for sure. It did work well when I've done it before, though. So.
That's I guess I hadn't thought about that one. I definitely had thought about what James was saying, and then I was curious how that might work. But that's a great thought. Still within the world, still relevant.
Yeah.
Just my character has all the spotlight, really,
the new
most
character.
of it
Yeah.
to start with, and you can really see how everybody gels together, and are they, at the end of the night. Clinking glasses and drinking the beer and eating the pretzels and all hooping and hollering all around it. So awesome. So any other thoughts that you guys have?
The only other little thing that, and I guess this could have happened in Eric's scenario as well, is what I try and do is have the new players in some ways have an answer to what the group's looking for, to kind of give them a purpose as to why they're joining, but also to give them value as to why they're joining. So the group, for example, didn't know, hasn't seen the mayor for some time, want to know why he's held up in the castle. The group have the new players have a few more details, have a few more clues, have a few more answers that can combine to that you've preloaded, that you've pre-given them in their little one-on-one session, so that they're coming with a piece of the plot puzzle as part of the game, which then gives them value and a reason as to why they would join in with the rest of the group. I have had bad examples of where I haven't done that, and the group have had no reason to kind of incorporate a new player and have literally ignored that new player for the first little bit. To be fair, they're kids and they were arseholes, but what you want to do is have a way that you can make the new players valuable to the group, to give them value so that there's a reason to be played with.
Isn't that the old joke? Why would all these people, these strangers meeting in a bar, decide that they're all going to trust each other implicitly and go do something?
Hey, that's another episode that we're going to do. But James, I cannot tell you how important that is, what you said, and I was going to bring it up, and it's so important. And I think how you can kind of think about this is always about, as a game master, you have to think about player character motivations. And this is kind of, to me, this is the flip of our Selfish Rogue episode question about, like, the Selfish Rogue player puts that role-playing onus on the other players of, like, if they're always acting selfish towards the group, why wouldn't the group drop them? The only reason they're not is because the meta knowledge of, there's this person we don't want to, it doesn't, we don't want to just, like, kick the person out maybe right away. So we're, like, keeping it going, even though our characters wouldn't, and they're putting all the weight on those characters. And what you're saying, it's kind of the same thing. Like, if you're introducing somebody, but they're not having a reason for the group wanting them in, they're not, and especially, like you said, providing something, an answer, an item, a skill, the skill set that they need to accomplish something, then yeah, you are putting that onus on those other players to be like, well, the only reason that we're accepting them in is because that's what's the meta of the game, of the player needs to join in the group. And that just never feels right. Never feels right to anybody. One other thing I want to bring up here that's a little trick, I would say, is how we always talk about mining character backgrounds as a game master. You can mine character backgrounds, your established players' backgrounds, when you're bringing this new player in, when you're talking about what their character can be. And, always kind of, I would say, it depends. It depends how much you know if you know a player would be kind of cool with that. And not saying, like, the big thing in their background, but you can take little things out of their background and be like, hey, that we have a character in the game that has, like, this uncle or something, or that was, like, has a real, like, loves this type of festivals, or had a real problem with, like, this country or something, and bring that to the new player coming in, so they're kind of mining that background for their own background to kind of create these threads between them. And maybe it's not something overt right away. But again, know your players. Some players, you'd be like, I know they'll be totally cool with me doing this. Other times you can ask them, be like, hey, would it be cool if the new character coming in maybe had these kind of connections with these things from your background? But I think it's hugely important to do some of this mining often, because that will create, beyond what James said, and I think, again, that's hugely important. You should always do what James said, like pretty much all the time. Having that deeper connection there will also, as the narrative goes on, and then that, the party discovering that will also bring them together in a lot of ways. And again, this doesn't have to be like they're like secret half brother or something. Maybe if they want to do that, that could be cool. You could bring that up, but not something that big. But having those little connections of either shared interests or shared points of where they were in the same place, same time during a certain event. Maybe they were both in this city when the dragon attacked and destroyed it, right? So they're both kind of, maybe they had a different experience, but they were both kind of refugees in a way or something. Maybe one was a peasant and one was a noble, but they were still had that kind of shared trauma. So things like that. I always find that makes a richer experience overall.
Sounds amazing. So I think we've really hit that topic pretty well. I think the first episode of season 3 went pretty good. I think we learned some good stuff here.
We did our stretches. We did our yoga before.
All right. Hey, thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you got something out of it. Remember to drop by masteringtherpg.com to learn about all our other projects and what we're working on, and contact us, support us. Please email gamemaster@masteringtherpg.com if you had questions, need advice, need some rule adjudication or question adjudication. We're here for you. just send us an email and we'll do it. And again, thanks to those who sent us emails this week. Once again, I'm Carl with Eric and James. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Happy gaming.